All right, I think I'm live. Just doing a quick meta episode in light of recent events with Kanye or Ye, Nick, Milo, Alex, Jones, all the gang, the recent drama. And so I've called this episode The Jewish Problem because I want to talk about my perspective. I've talked about it many times before, but I just want to take this opportunity to sort of highlight why I have my perspective and why I think it's dangerous to take the approach that many in the alt-right seem to want to take. So I'm not associated with the alt-right. I don't identify as right or left or even center on any political ideological spectrum. As you know, if you've watched any of my content over the years, you know I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, and that's it. That's about it. I don't trust the politicians on the left. I don't trust the politicians on the right or in the center. I don't trust any politician. I don't trust any human, period, other than the God-man, Jesus Christ. So I don't trust any non-divine human. Okay, I've made that very clear over the years. But I want to talk about the Jewish problem, the so-called Jewish problem. And I don't need to rehash what Kanye said or Ye. Forgive me for old habits die hard. I was joking on Twitter that I'm going to start calling myself Vid instead of David. Vid. But, that in and of itself I find a little bit silly and childish. But whatever. I've never been a huge fan of Ye, never been a fan of Kanye West or the Kardashians or any of that pop culture stuff or pop music generally. I don't know his music. He doesn't strike me as particularly bright, but I do admire him to the extent that he's Christian. I think that he's probably a new Christian. It seems like I don't know him, but from what I've seen, it seems like he's a new Christian, and so that's exciting. I'm happy for Ye. Pray for him, obviously. And Nick Fuentes, I'm a fan. I am a fan because he's a bright young guy. I think he's cute. He's Catholic, from what I can gather. He's sincere in his faith. Every indication is that he's got a healthy attitude towards the Jews and towards the non-Jews and towards religion. And politics is another question. I think I probably disagree with his politics, but I don't know. I'm not really one to judge politics because I avoid it. I just generally avoid it my whole life long. So, but I think he's a good guy, and I think he's a sincere Catholic. Is his approach misguided and immature? Probably, but not a big deal. I mean, I don't know if I've ever met a Catholic saint walking this planet. Probably not. If I had, I think I would remember. So is it a surprise that this particular Catholic young man doesn't strike me as perfected and purified? In other words, that he's not yet a saint? No, it's not surprising at all. And I love my fellow humans, warts and all. So the Jewish problem, the emphasis that's placed on the Jewish mafia or the cabal or whatever you want to call it, excuse me, in right-wing circles, there's a lot of emphasis placed on this so-called Jewish mafia. And I really don't see the point. I really don't see the point of emphasizing the fact that there may be a disproportionate number of cultural Jews, what St. Paul called carnal Jews, atheist Jews, not true religious Jews, but people who identify as Jewish for other reasons, for worldly reasons. So we could call them worldly Jews or whatever you want to call them. I don't understand, why would you emphasize that? Even if it is the case, even if it's 100% of the bad guys who are running the globalist New World Order or whatever it is, even if 100% of them identify as these sort of ethnic Jews, who cares? Who cares? It's got to be some group. It's going to be, so-called blacks or so-called, Asians or Chinese, or it's going to be, you know, Mongolians, I don't know. I mean, we all have these different groups that we can identify with and identify as. You know, I suppose I could be called white or Caucasian or, you know, English stock, colonial stock, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, whatever, European white male. I'm not attached to any of those labels. I don't particularly take pride in any of those labels. You know, there are good people, certainly in the history of the British Isles, and on a case by case basis, I guess there's a nice list and a naughty list, and everyone belongs on one or the other, and there's a hierarchy within each one of those lists. There are grades both in heaven and in hell, and God is the final judge. Only God knows the heart. But this whole identity politics thing, I don't understand why the alt-right, or whatever you want to call it, the Christian nationalists or anyone else would want to play that game. Why would you want to play that game? I just don't understand. We know that God is good, and we know that if you oppose God, you're in danger. So that, to me, that's the bottom line. And I have heard Nick emphasize that point, but why doesn't he stop there? Why doesn't he center his focus on that? That's my little gentle critique of Nick Fuentes. Now, with Ye and Milo, I've never been fans, so I don't follow them as much. I don't know really what they're all about, what makes them tick. So I tend to talk a little bit more about Nick. But, you know, we live in a world that is fallen. This is a fallen world. And I like to talk of it like it's a prison planet. I think it's a good analogy. And it's naive. I think it's incredibly naive to tackle the hierarchy, Satan's hierarchy in this prison planet. To tackle it head on directly, I think, is naive and foolish and useless. I think that the approach that Jesus Christ and his apostles took was to combat the love of self, right? To kill the old man, to die to self, to live in Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. I think that's the only way. And with the analogy of the prison, I mean, if I were in prison, I'd keep my head down and I would try not to belong to any gang, you know, racial gang, the white gang, the black gang, the Jewish gang, whatever. It's just like, I don't want to belong. I'm an individual, and I don't condone your violence. I don't condone your worldview, your attitudes. You know, it's just like, no, I do not want to belong to your cult or your gang or whatever it is, period. I'm an individual. Okay, and I'm going to just quietly work out my salvation in fear and trembling. So that's how I would behave, I would think, I would hope, if I ended up in the big house. God forbid. But in my analogy, it seems like people on the right, for lack of a better term, even that's nebulous and hard to define, but people on the right, people that are accused of being on the right, especially the far right, they seem to be playing that ladder climbing game within the prison planet. Why? Why? It's sad. It saddens me. Just we know the truth, we know the outcome, we know where the battle lines are, and we know the difference between good and evil. Isn't that enough? God said to St. Paul, my grace is sufficient. In other words, I'm not going to remove the thorns from your side because my grace is sufficient. So St. Paul embraced his suffering, he embraced his trials, he embraced his thorns, he embraced his weakness, his imperfections, he embraced his ignorance, he embraced everything that he brought to the table. He embraced that as straw, he acknowledged it as straw, and he died to self. He actively pursued the good race, which is to As St. John the Baptist said, Christ must increase, I must decrease. This is what it's all about. And we see St. Paul does that. He's an example. St. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I've never heard Ye say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I'm glad he hasn't said that, because that would be hubris at this point. He's not in a position to say that. Neither is Nick, frankly. Nick is not in a position to say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Nick is not in a position to say that. I'm not in a position to say that. The great saints were. St. Paul was in a position to say that. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. So that's what we should do. We shouldn't start climbing the ladder of this prison gang life. It's just a complete waste of time, and it's playing into the hands of Satan. That's what I think. I'm just going to respond to my friend here, Nugloff. His name is Matthew. I'm going to have him on soon. Yeah, sure. He's going to send me an article. Thanks, bro. Sorry, I can't multitask, so I had to get that over with. So yeah, I really think we need to, as Christians, I think we really need to focus on the whole prison planet analogy. Satan is the prince of this world, and our kingdom, if we identify with Christ, we can say with Christ, my kingdom is not of this world, period. Right? Put your head down, and when you are confronted by the satanic hierarchy that runs this world, then you can have your snappy comebacks like Jesus Christ. Okay? And don't prepare ahead of time. Let the Holy Spirit speak through you in the moment. When they try to crush you, when they try to persecute you, you're going to have some pretty witty comebacks, as long as you don't prepare. As long as you don't prepare and act like it's your war and you're the general in the war. No. We need to be humble. We need to be small. We need to be like little children. And then when we get crushed, we'll have the witty comeback that will humiliate and embarrass Satan and his minions, period. We have to remain children. We have to remain humble. So I'm very disappointed in the way things have gone. Watching the 3-hour episode or whatever it was on Alex Jones, I was cringing. I was not enjoying that whatsoever. It's a bit of an embarrassment. And I agree with the basic idea that God is good and that Hitler is ontologically good, good by nature, evil by choice, as St. Augustine famously said. He didn't talk about Hitler, but he was talking about all creatures, including Satan. Satan is good by nature, evil by choice, and Satan is the image par excellence of that distinction that we must make in every creature, including, and most importantly, the man in the mirror, the man or the woman in the mirror, right? I am good by nature. I am evil by choice. That's the sad reality. So, there was, when it comes to calling out the Jews, as I said very early on, we have to abstract beyond the name calling and the pattern matching, because the pattern matching can get us into hot water. And Satan wants to trick us into doing some pattern matching, like what sort of statistics do we gather in terms of proportions, and what's a disproportionate representation of this ethnic group or that particular ethnic group or religion or whatever it might be, or this culture or that culture, right? That's a trap. So I mentioned to someone on Twitter today, that I think Nick made a mistake by, and Ye made a mistake by singling out the Jews and explicitly mentioning the Jews, because we need to abstract, we need to generalize more in order to avoid the pitfalls and the traps of Satan. We need to generalize and get right to the heart of the issue, the heart of the matter, which is that there are, as St. Augustine famously said, and as I never tire of repeating, there are two cities characterized by two loves. The love of self unto contempt of God, those are the bad guys. And then we have the love of God unto contempt of self. Those are the good guys. And St. Ignatius of Loyola says something similar when he paints the image in our minds of the two hills with the two standards or flags on those two hills, and the troops that gather under each standard are opposing, and they're in a great battle. The battle between good and evil. The two standards are the standard of Christ and the standard of Satan or Antichrist. Okay, so just have to pick one, and it's not difficult. If you understand metaphysics, it's not difficult. If you understand history, it's not difficult. If you understand authority, it's not difficult, right? The standard of Christ will call you if you have the clarity and if you have the wisdom to repent and to receive the good news and to digest the good news and to chew on and meditate on and nourish yourself on the good news, then you will understand that God exists, and in the economy of salvation, God freely chose to send the second person of the Most Holy Trinity to incarnate, to take on flesh, and to suffer and die for us, to redeem us. And he is the Jewish Messiah, and Jesus Christ is the Jewish Messiah, which is why we don't take lightly any sort of anything that would even suggest anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish sentiment, because we as Christians, we worship the Jews. We worship the Jews. We worship the Jews, and we are the younger son, and we have to respect the eldest, which is the Jews, right? They are the chosen people. We are eating crumbs under the table, period. And if God can break off the branches of the natural olive tree, then certainly he can break off those foreign branches that are grafted on. And that's who we are. That's who the Goy, the Gentiles, the nations, the non-Jews, that's who we are. We are the younger brother, usurping for the time being, the eldest son. All with a view to eventually bringing them back in. So it's not all about the Jews, but the Jews play a central role in salvation history, whether you like it or not. And I always say there's a history before the Jews. There's a history that predates the Hebrews. There's a history that predates Abraham, our father in the faith. There's a history before that. And I'm not talking about, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, or billions of years like the evolutionists would have us believe. I'm talking about, hundreds of years. I don't know exactly. It's 1,000 or 2,000 or 4,000 or what it is. Before the Jews, before the history of the Jews came on the scene. So the Jews are not the be-all and the end-all, but they are a big part of salvation history, period. And we have to love and respect the Jews. Now, the whole point of Judaism, as I often talk about on my podcast, is the Messiah. They were talking about the Messiah, hoping for the Messiah, prophesying the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah, how imminent it is, and when he's going to come, and what he's going to do, and where he's going to be born, and where he's going to live. And Judaism is about the Messiah. Okay, so Judaism does presuppose, I guess we could say, Judaism does presuppose the Christ and Christianity. Make no mistake about it. And the Jews that accepted their Messiah are what we call Christians, the early Christians. Were there Judaizers trying to keep some of the traditions of men? Yes, but that was pronounced against, that was condemned by the early church. You can cite the Council of Jerusalem and the famous battle between Peter and Paul, and to this day the Radtrads love associating with Paul in that battle against Peter, and the Sedevacantists do the same thing. But that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's a historical fact that we have the first council, the first local council, not an ecumenical council, but the first local council in Jerusalem, and they talked about the Judaizers, they talked about the issues of the traditions of men, and that was hashed out to a certain extent. And but my point here is that there's everything in history is divided before and after the coming of the true Jewish Messiah. That's why our calendars reflect that in the Christian West, right? The Jews that I meet here in Montreal, they talk about the year being, rather than 2022, they talk about it being 5,782 or whatever it might be. Something like that. But for the Christian West, it is, which dominates the history of the West since the coming of the Messiah, it is that dividing line in our calendars, right? And similarly, before, there are other key moments in salvation history, and the Jews occupy a big chunk of salvation history. They're very, very, very important. Okay, and they will come back in. If you read Romans 11, and I have as my thumbnail, I have that image. Let me see if I can find it for you. I'll blow it up just a little bit. See, one moment, please. Not good at multitasking. Here it is. Okay. Can you see that? Boom. So this is the way I phrase it on Twitter when I'm countering the those who are obsessed with the Jewish conspiracy theories. I say there's good news and there's bad news, and I'll give you the bad news first. There is a partial hardening that has come upon the Jews. It's true. But that's not where it ends. There's more. There's good news. The good news is that it's only until the full number of the Gentiles comes in. In other words, it's only until the full number of the non-Jews come to Christ. And you can see Romans 11 for more information about that. This is the gospel. This is the good news. This is the teaching of the church. The unbroken tradition of the church is that, yes, a partial hardening has come upon the Jews, but it's just temporary. It's just temporary. And the end times are all about the coming of Christ. They're all about, revealing of what's in the hearts of man. And it's all about the trials and tribulations that we're going to go through and all the agony because of the fall. It's sort of culminating in those birth pangs when the second coming of Christ is at hand. So I don't want to get into eschatology. I'm not that studied on it. I know that we're in the end times. The age of the church is the end times, and that we're not to predict any specific dates, and no one knows. And don't believe anyone that thinks they know, and these sorts of things. That's about as far as my eschatology goes. But I know that we are going to be found either in one or the other of those two cities that St. Augustine talks about in his famous work, City of God. That's why he called his work City of God, because that's the city populated by those who love God unto contempt of self. That's the city of God. And then we have the other city on St. Ignatius's other hill under the banner of Satan and the Antichrist. And those warriors, those soldiers, those minions of Satan, they love self unto the contempt of God. So when Christ comes again, or at the moment of your particular death, if you happen to die before the second coming, which I think is safe to assume, but we never know. At that moment of your death or the second coming, you will be found to be in one state or the other, in one camp or the other, in one group or the other, in one city or the other. So let's choose wisely. Let's choose life, as St. Moses says. I don't know if that just slipped out, St. Moses. I don't think we call Moses a saint, but you get the idea. Patriarch Moses. Right? So once again, the bad news, a partial hardening has come upon the Jews, and the good news, it's only until the full number of the Gentiles comes to Christ. So you can see Romans 11 for that, for more information on that. And I can't emphasize this enough in that when it comes to the so-called problem of the Jews, I can't emphasize it enough. This is what it's all about, right? It's a partial hardening, and we need to pray for the Jews. We need to pray that the secular Jews become religious Jews, and then we need to pray that the religious Jews become Christian. And we need to pray that all Christians become into the fullness of Christianity, which is the church, the Catholic Church. So, anyone who knows me and my podcast knows that I always emphasize this 3-step process to getting saved. First, you need to figure out that you're not God, that God is God. So you have the generic monotheism. Then you need to figure out which monotheistic religion is the true one. So you look at the history of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and each monotheistic religion has a story about the Messiah. And Nick Fuentes is eager to point out that in the Talmud, they depict Jesus as boiling in excrement in hell. So they have a story about the Messiah. They think he's a false Messiah. They think he's a liar, a lunatic, and not a legend, but just a liar and a lunatic and an evil man. So the Jews have a story about the true Messiah. They think he's a false Messiah, and the Muslims have a story about the true Messiah. They think he's a good man and a prophet. Greater than Muhammad or second to Muhammad. I've never quite figured out where they stand on that hierarchy. But anyway, everyone has an opinion about Jesus Christ. And so once you look at history, you can figure out pretty quickly that Christianity is the one true religion. And then once you look at the issue of authority, you can figure out that Catholicism is the fullness of the Christian faith. So I want to talk now just a little bit about the Holocaust. And my favorite take on the Holocaust is that it's the left, and ironically, it's the secular Jews on the left who are the biggest Holocaust deniers. It's a controversial statement, but it is, I think the statistics do bear it out, that the people on the left, including the secular Jews who are on the left, they are the biggest Holocaust deniers. And I'm talking about the Holocaust of abortion, right? So how many millions of humans are killed every year by abortion? The WHO, the World Health Organization, puts it at, I think, 74 or 75 million per year in recent times. Okay, so if there were 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, and I know nothing about the statistics, I know nothing. I don't have a problem accepting that number because I haven't looked into it. Not terribly interested. I mean, one person being tortured and killed is too many. One is too many, right? I look at what the communists did, how many millions they killed, and if Hitler and the Nazis killed 6 million Jews, that's horrible. If they killed and tortured and killed one Jew, that's horrible. 6 million is 6 million times more horrendous than having killed one, but one is too many. But I haven't looked into it. I don't know the numbers. I've been to Dachau, and I was impressed by the setup, just the cleanliness of it and how everything was organized, and it looked like it was brand new. It looked like a brand new facility. That's how it looked. And this is not an invitation for the conspiracy theorists to say, aha, they just built it. They built it as a prop. I don't know, but I was there. I just give them the benefit of the doubt when they told me the history of the place. I just gave them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. I do not care. I know that evil is evil. I know it's evil to hate your fellow man. I know that. So I don't need to know which statistics are wrong and which story is wrong and which one was made up and which one was a false flag. I don't care. I know that I have the principle that hating any of God's creatures is evil. Okay? because every one of God's creatures is ontologically good, including Satan. And this is what Ye is getting a lot of grief for, saying that Hitler is ontologically good, but it's true. And God loves Satan and Hitler and Mao Zedong and me and you. Okay? God loves a blade of grass because the blade of grass is good. It's a reflection of God's own goodness. You have to understand that. Now, how deep is Ye with his theological and metaphysical understanding of all this stuff? I don't know, but it seems to be on the right track. He seems to be on the right track. I think he understands that God is love. I think he said that he loves the Jews and the Nazis and everyone, and so do I, right? It's just because what's the alternative? The alternative is to fall into the trap of Satan and to hate your fellow creatures. You can't do that and go to heaven. You cannot do that and go to heaven, period. Now, is it prudent? Is it wise to start announcing that you love Hitler? No, it's foolish because it gives the wrong impression. It's very misguided. It's very immature. Right? We need to acknowledge that there are bad guys doing bad stuff, and I'm not claiming to know or understand what is the true history of World War II. I haven't looked into it. Okay, haven't looked into it. Would I be surprised to find out that the minions of Satan who run this sick fallen world have made up a bunch of false news about history and put it into the history books and taught me and other people throughout the generations this fake news? No, it would not surprise me at all. Would not surprise me at all. In fact, I would expect it. I would expect that. But I'm not going to jump on a pet theory about this or that particular fake news thing, right? Like, I mean, if I wanted to invest time to come to a rock solid conclusion about the moon landing or 9/11 or whatever, I could do that. And I have hunches. I do have hunches, and I allow myself to have a hunch. And it just remains a hunch. Right? I am very, very, very skeptical of people with money and power, which is another point I wanted to raise today, which is that Ye has money, Ye has power. Nick has money, Nick has power. To me, those are red flags. Those are orange flags. Let's put it that way. Those are orange flags. My expectation for Ye, for Nick, for Milo, for Alex Johnson, for the whole, anyone who has substantial amounts of money and influence is prone to corruption. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. That's the way it is. So unless you're a humble, meek Catholic hidden away doing your own thing in penance and prayer, I'm going to be pretty skeptical of you. I'm going to expect you to be corrupted because you're weak. I know you're weak because I'm weak. So as much as I admire Nick for being a bright young man with a lot of charisma and what seems to be a very moderate Catholic faith. By moderate, I mean he's not a rad trad, he's not bashing Pope Francis. And he seems to have a very dignified view of tradition and of the living magisterium. In spite of all that, he's a public figure. He's got fans and followers and maybe an angry mob that's willing to do bad stuff because they are not grounded in the truth of God. They're not grounded. They're just fanatical and just a bunch of yahoos that are unstable, and immature. And it's like, would that surprise me? No. Do I think all of his fans are mature and holy and humble? No, of course not. So I'm very cautious, in spite of the fact that I do think he's a bright young man, and I think he's got the faith. And in spite of all his flaws, I do like and admire that young man, and I wish him well, and I hope he can mature in his his worldly endeavors, because that is the danger. That is the main concern, is that these endeavors are worldly. To aspire to political power is a red flag. Sorry, to aspire to political power for me is a red flag. If you're aspiring to political power, that's a red flag. Period. Goes for Ye, Nick, anyone else who's throwing their hat in the ring and wants to be wants a slice of the pie. I'm sorry, that's a red flag. Okay, I might like you, I might admire certain things about you, but I don't want to go so far as to say you're the enemy if you're throwing your hat in the political ring. That's maybe a bit extreme to say you're my enemy and that you are a minion of Satan. That's too extreme. But let's just say you look like you're playing with fire and you're going to get burnt. That's what it looks like to me. Because my vision for politics is, one version that seems healthy and Catholic and sane. One version, if we're not going to go with monarchy and some sort of theocracy, one version that is sort of like a democratic model would be that small groups, like starting with the individual and the family and then the neighborhood, the community, these ever larger circles, each group, successively larger groups and subsets within those groups, each one elects what they think is their best representative. And that representative won't be chosen if that individual is hungry for power, right? The group just won't select you if you look like you want political power. That's not who they're going to select. They're going to select someone who's good and holy and humble, and it's going to be an imposition. It's going to be a pain in the neck for that individual to expend the extra time and energy of being involved in public life and in the politics. That's, if you read the history of the great saints, it's very often the case that they were called by their community to represent them and to be, a leader. And the church at times has been very, very involved in politics. So there are many cases we can read where this happens. And then you have the reluctant hero who feels obliged to rise to the occasion. And there are many, many stories like that. So that's the way I think politics should be, right? We should have Catholic families with good values, good principles, good education that starts at home. And then we have everything built from there up. And of course, the family is built up of individuals, and each individual has to be, striving to live, to die to self and live in Christ, right? So that's my vision for a healthy political representative democracy. It's a fantasy. I'm not pushing it. I'm not promoting it. I'm not working toward that. The only way that I'm working toward that is to remind myself constantly that I need to work on my stuff before I turn around and start telling my wife or those around me what they should improve, right? Like, so it's a constant struggle to resist the temptation to point out the straw in the other man's eye when I've got the log in my own eye. So that's where it starts for me. And it's easy, frankly, it's easy because I'm constantly aware of my shortcomings and constantly aware of my sin and and my weakness. So it's quite easy. It's maybe a gift. Maybe it's a gift that I have. But that's my vision for politics in this sick and fallen world. And it ain't going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm not holding my breath. I'm not excited about the future of MAGA and the Republican Party. It's like, I'm not excited about that. I was excited for a little while when Trump was riling up the populist movement and all this sort of thing. And I still get excited, by the Freedom Convoy here in Canada. And like when the people get excited, they get inspired by a movement or by a particular charismatic leader or whatever it is. Like I can get excited. I can enjoy that wave and that ride. But I also moderate that excitement, that elation with my faith, with my faith, which tells me to not put my trust in princes, to not put my faith in princes of this world, right? So I'm grounded by that. I can allow myself to get a little bit excited by some populist uprisings, all the while being realistic and skeptical about the individuals that make up any group. It's going to be a mixed bag if if we take God's point of view and we look at this exciting protest erupting here or there across the globe, and we see more and more of them, these populist uprisings. We can get excited about the idea of a worldly justice and this sort of thing, and certainly the Jews of Jesus' day were excited about the idea of a worldly sort of justice, military leader in the Messiah, and these sorts of things. But my kingdom is not of this world. I just want to say hi to Bread of Life here, Rebecca. Bread of Life. Hey, book a spot soon, please. Let's catch up. Love you. Heart emoji. Yeah, so Rebecca, we should definitely chat soon. You know how to book. You can just send me an email, or you can use my Calendly app to book. And anyone else who listens to this in future, if you want to come chat on my podcast, I've got a nice Calendly app that makes it really quick and easy. Or you can just send me an email at cvs.podcast@gmail.com. So I think I've said everything I wanted to say. I was talking about the Holocaust of abortion. Okay, Rebecca says she's taking a little break from YouTube right now. Sure, no problem. I understand. Yes, when I was talking about the Holocaust deniers, the Holocaust of abortion is huge. And it's something I think about every day. It's something I pray about every day. And they're fixed set prayers that I pray for those who are thinking of having an abortion, and for the abortionist and the staff, and of course, for the unborn. There are a couple of prayers that I pray, including a prayer by Blessed Fulton Sheen, which is sort of a spiritual adoption, where I can adopt a child who's in danger of abortion. And if you pray that religiously every day for the 9 months, then there's some promises attached that, I never take these promises too seriously, but there's some promises attached that you could have some positive outcome, you're building some relationship in the mystical realm with this child that you're praying for. And it's an unknown, unnamed child that's in danger of abortion, okay, for that 9 months. And then you repeat for the next 9 months, and so on and so forth. So I've probably done that for 6 cycles now, maybe 5. And it feels good. It's my favorite prayer, actually, because it has a promise attached to it. Like, even though I'm not holding God to this promise, because it's not an infallible teaching of the church. It's just a pious belief, and who knows? But it's a nice idea. Praying for the unborn. And it's here in Montreal. We have the Morgentaler Clinic right down the road by the church that I used to volunteer at. And they had some renovations at the church, and they had to move their offices over to the building that Dr. Morgentaler set up here in Montreal for abortions. And on their contract, because they're a Catholic parish or chapel, and because they're priests and they're pro-life and anti-abortion, they were made to sign a contract, a piece of paper, saying that they would not utter the word abortion, Dr. Morgentaler, they wouldn't talk about pro-life, pro-choice, anything. Okay, they had to sign this document in order to be able to rent property, a temporary office space for the chapel, because it was under renovations. They weren't able to rent space unless they explicitly promised, under threat of lawsuit and expulsion, to not utter these taboo words. So I do understand those on the right wing who question the taboo. Why can we blaspheme Jesus Christ, but we can't talk about the Holocaust? Why can't we talk about Hitler? Why can't we talk about the Nazis or the history and whatever? I do understand that frustration. I do understand that. I don't think we should have taboos. I think everything should be open. We should be able to let cooler heads prevail. We should talk about everything and anything. And when I speak with a Satanist or an anti-Catholic, I'm not threatened. I'm scared for their salvation, but I'm not worried for my salvation. I'm not worried if they want to chop my head off. That's a one-way ticket to heaven. So I'm not worried about my enemies in terms of threat level to me. I'm worried about my enemies in terms of the foolish mistake they're making, right? So I do understand on the right when people are angry. Why is it taboo? Why is it taboo? Why can't we talk about the Jews? Why can't we criticize the Jews? Well, first of all, these aren't religious Jews that you're criticizing for the most part, right? So it's kind of irrelevant to clump them in with Judaism. It's sort of irrelevant, not to mention the fact that the true spiritual Jews are the Christians, and there's a prophecy that the hardening has come upon the Jews, and it will not lift. That hardening will not be lifted until the full number of the Gentiles come into the church. So are you trying to force God's hand, or do you trust God that this partial hardening is part of salvation history? That's the way God's doing it, and it's for our benefit. It's for the Gentiles' benefit. Just be happy. Thank God that there's a taboo against talking about the Jews. Thank God there's a taboo, because it's part of God's plan, right? He's letting us in. We're not the chosen people. We're the wild branches grafted onto the natural olive tree. So thank God, right? Don't complain. Thank God. That's my approach. So I really think that those on the right are misguided, and they're fooled by Satan himself and Satan's minions and the world, which is in a sad state of affairs. It's a sick, fallen world. I think the people on the right wing are fooled, and they're misguided. And I'm concerned about them going down these rabbit holes and into what's called anti-Semitism, which is an absurd accusation to level against a Christian, right? Like, how can a Christian be an anti-Semite? It's absolutely oxymoronic. It cannot be. It's like you pick one. You're going to be an anti-Semite or you're going to be a Christian. You can't be both. So that's up to each individual to, in their own heart, to decide which camp they're in. But that's it. I'm not here to judge anyone I'm not here to judge Ye or Nick or Milo or Alex Jones or any of the characters in this little right-wing mini drama that's been playing out. There's one other little tidbit which I thought I'd mention, which is that swastika within the Star of David. That's a famous symbol of the Raelians. The Raelian cult, it's a sect, a religious sect. They were well known for their, alien lore and sex parties and orgies and stuff like that back in the day. Now they're sort of distancing themselves from that whole decadent indulgence with free love, although it is still a tenet of their worldview, because I interviewed two Raelians about 5 years ago now. I went to one of their religious gatherings, and they're very nice people and warm and loving, and obviously misguided, I think. It's safe to say, yes, I think it's a satanic false religion. But surprise, surprise, I think that every false religion is not of God. It's allowed by God, and it's used by God to bring people into the fullness of the Catholic faith, obviously. But I think that error is evil, lies are evil, any mistake is evil, and every false religion is evil to the extent that it's wrong about essential saving truths, right? So, but I just wanted to mention that with the Raelians. I'll put a link in the description of this video for the two interviews. Quite interesting to listen to. And there's a connection between that French sect. Rael was French from France, and then Quebec. He moved his camp to Quebec right here. So it's quite an interesting historical slice of life. And I was able to go and visit them at their place of worship, which is just basically a rented hall in a hotel room. But yeah, very, very interesting that Ye was banned. Is it banned from Twitter or suspended from Twitter or whatever it is? I don't happen to agree with that. I don't think he should have been suspended. I think he could say whatever he wants to say. I'm very, very, very pro free speech, free speech. Um, I think that people are not allowed to break the law. If you break the law, then you pay the price, right? If you get caught, you go to prison or whatever it is. Like we have a justice system, and if I say right now I'm gonna go to the grocery store and shoplift a chocolate bar, I'm not going to. But if I say that, I there's no law against that. There's no law against that. I can say as a joke or as to make a point or whatever, I'm gonna go to the grocery store and I'm gonna shoplift. I can say that. It's not against the law. It's also not true. I'm not going to go do that, but because I'm Christian. But I can say it. I can say it. I'm allowed to say it, and I do not want to put a law in place that forbids me from saying that as a joke or to make a point, or even if I'm a criminal and I'm letting you know, I'm confessing ahead of time, I'm going to go steal a chocolate bar from the grocery store. That in itself is not a crime. Now, I think if I threaten to kill you, I think there are certain conditions whereby that is illegal, right? A legitimate, credible threat of harm or death or whatever. I think that is already illegal, and you can't do that. I don't think Ye did that. Ye said he's not for violence. Nick said he's not for violence. They're not condoning violence. And so, what's the problem, right? What's the problem? Like, we know there's corruption. We know there are competing mafias in this sick world. They seem to be against that evil corruption and those mafias, right? That's not illegal. That's good. That's a good and holy attitude to be against corruption, to be against mafias, right? Now, are they right? Do they understand who and where and what and why? I don't think so. I really don't. I really doubt it. If they had the information, look, if you have the information, don't talk about it on Alex Jones. Go to the cops, go to the military, go to whoever you trust. Now, if you think that we cannot trust any of our judiciary or the police or these different, you know, bodies that we have set up allegedly to protect society and individuals, if you can't trust any of them, and that might be you could make a pretty good case for that, I think, that we can't trust them. Well, then put your head down. That's what I say. Put your head down. Don't. I'm not for violent revolution. I'm not for stirring up the hornet's nest. I'm for putting your head down and getting right with God, because time's running out. We're going to face our Maker pretty soon, right? So either you can trust the cops and the military and the lawyers and the judges and the system. You can trust at least parts of that, in which case, if you have information, take it to them. But if, on the other hand, you can't trust any of them, just put your head down and suffer and die. Get ready to die. That's it. That's how I see it. So that's why I can't get behind any of these, really, I can't really get behind any of these uprisings and revolutions. And it's hard to judge. It really is hard to judge in particular cases where I don't have the historical context and I don't know what's going on. And maybe the good guys are uprising against the bad guys in a very concrete way, and everything's cut and dry, and it's so corrupt that they can't trust the cops or the military or whatever it is, or the justice system in that particular place. And I don't know. I mean, I don't see violence as a solution, but maybe at times it is. I know that there were holy wars, and I know the Crusades happened, and the glorious Crusades. My hunch is that they were good, the Crusades for the most part, and probably some corruption in there. Goodbye, Rebecca. Thanks for popping by. I'll talk to you soon. God bless. there was probably some corruption in the Crusades and these sorts of things. And in this sick, fallen world, you're always going to have a mixed bag. You're always going to have the weeds among the wheat. You're going to have wolves in sheep's clothing. It's dangerous. It's scary. It's hard to judge. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush and just dismiss every populist uprising and every time the energy levels, the outrage and the righteous indignation spill over into some sort of populist revolution or something like that. Like, I mean, I'm cautious to condone or endorse anything because I don't have the complete story on any of these situations, past or present. So it's hard for me to really get behind anything, but I can definitely say that I'm with God over against his enemies, and I'm for truth and justice and goodness and all these sorts of things. And certainly I'm against pornography and abortion and pedophilia and, prostitution, human trafficking, violence, all that nasty stuff. I think it's a pretty common sense position when it comes to all the nasty stuff, crime, and corruption. And I do see a lot of corruption. I think a lot of people are ignoring just how deep the corruption runs in this world, in individuals and groups and governments. I think people are content to look at the world through rose-colored glasses and to be naive. And I I just try not to judge these people because they're busy with their lives. But in my particular case, I've grown over the years, especially since 9/11, to be more cautious and suspicious about those in power. And then with COVID, of course, it's been very eye-opening. And then having been physically assaulted at a Catholic church by the Catholic security guard last year or whenever it was, that was eye-opening too. So yeah, the corruption and the worldliness of the godless baby killers is horrifying, and I need nothing but the abortion statistics. That alone, I need nothing more than that to know that this is a sick and evil, corrupt world, and that the governments are implicated. Like I see ads at the bus stop. I don't take the bus, but I pass by the bus stop and I see ads demonizing cigarette smoking. And I think that's good because they want health. They don't want people dying from lung cancer. But on the other hand, I know that the government is taxing very heavily and they're making a lot of money, and they don't have to do that. If the government really is a nanny state looking out for us and taking our health seriously, they're not going to be profiting from something as evil as tobacco or any other drugs, much less marijuana, which now they're pushing in Canada. I just drove by an official government drug den, like the place where they sell marijuana and hashish and CBDs and all this stuff. I think CBDs are not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just very clear any government that's pushing or condoning or profiting by sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I mean, it's corrupt. It is corrupt, period. So I do have sympathy. I do have sympathy for those sort of radical, extreme, right-wing, alt-right, whatever, Christian nationalists or whatever you are. I sympathize. I understand your frustration. I understand your anger. I understand all that. But just for the love of God, just center yourself on what's important in this life. What's essential? What is the path? What is the path? What is God asking you to do? Right? My kingdom is not of the world. My kingdom is not of this world. That's what we have to remember. So don't get tempted. Don't get tempted by the world. Don't go making yourself a hero. Nick and Ye are both talking about they're ready to die. They're ready to die. They're ready to die. And they could get assassinated. They could get suicided, Epsteined, or whatever. And it is a real possibility. So is that prudent? Is that prudent? you know, to put your life on the line? Is it worth it? Are you doing God's will, God's positive will, or His permissive will? You really need to think about it. So anyway, I'm not judging anyone. Just put my 2 cents in here today about the problem of the Jews, the so-called problem of the Jews. So I hope you understand my position and my concerns for this world. My concerns for you as an individual, whoever you are listening to this. My current concern for you is the same as my concern for myself or my concern for Ye and Nick and the gang. It's always the same concern. Right? You want to know God, to love God, and to serve God in this life so you can be happy with Him in the next life, period. Right? Let's not fall into the Satan's traps of worldliness. Okay? Because our kingdom is not of this world. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take good care. And we'll talk soon. God bless.